Hey, Dr. Arnold.
Hi, Stephanie Kalota. How are you?
Doing good.
Good evening. Welcome to America's Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show. I'm your host, U.S. Army Iraqi combat medic and flight surgeon Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, U.S. Army National Guard retired. Our guest speaker is Stephanie Kalota, U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class, veteran founder of the Political Veteran Podcast and AHG Correspondent. Tonight is a very important topic as we're going through a very tumultuous time with legal rulings and many things going on in the higher federal government level. We have a judicial oversight and regulation of executive branch's actions, orders, and military policy when it comes to questions of constitutionality. So Stephanie wanted to really focus on particular issues that are going on right now with respect to the constitutionality of actions that are being taken by the executive order. So, Stephanie, why don't you open up and give us a little bit about what this topic is about?
Okay. So first, I'll say I'm not a lawyer. So just
okay.
and put that out there. I am a journalist. I'm a student of learning, and especially a lot of things. I do love legislation and judicial stuff. I do study law on the side, but I do not practice law. So FYI out there, big disclaimer. So no one's confused. So a lot of people out there, especially on social media, seems to be pretty confused or not understanding how the judicial system can affect the executive branch and especially their actions. Most notably, I've seen, at least on social media, is for the transgender ban in the military in that court case. But there's other court cases that's been coming up with President Trump's actions that has been in the judicial system a lot. And so when you look at the Constitution, it does say that the judicial system, the Supreme Court and the inferior courts, because most people skip that line, can review pretty much executive orders, laws, or not exactly, they don't specifically say executive orders, but they say laws and other things pertaining to all the things that the other branches do, what they actually exercise. And since it doesn't actually specifically say executive orders or that it rules on the executive branch, a lot of people seem to think that just because the Constitution says it doesn't happen means it doesn't happen at all. But the thing is that that's the reason why we also have Supreme Court cases after that to set legal precedent on how they interpret the Constitution. Many scholars actually reference Madison versus Marbury, 1804 or 1803. I always mix up those 2 years, but it actually is the Supreme Court justice that ruled on that case was a founding father and signed the Constitution, so he knows what really was part of it. And it basically states there's a lot of different questions on that case, but one of the big ones was whether the judicial system can exercise over executive orders. And they ruled that they can. And then ever since then, there's been a lot of cases since then, because the judicial system is in place to really make sure that laws, policies, make sure that they are constitutional. And if they're unconstitutional, overrule, and also basically set them back to square one, you got to start over types of things. And the judicial system has ruled that laws that Congress passed are unconstitutional. They've ruled that before. So there shouldn't be that they can do it for one branch, but they can't do it for the other. That's not what it says in the Constitution. So that's a lot of things that people don't understand about that.
Yeah, because I mean, when they set up the Constitution, Article 1 was really for the Congress, Article 2 for the President, Article 3 for the really the Supreme Court of the United States, the judicial system, and if they were actually looking at them as being co-equal branches, and they were fearful that one of them would try to assume too much power and take over the rulership of the country. So we were just coming out of, I was speaking to Congressman Davis before about this, but there was a push, to get away from England when we had the Revolutionary War in this country. And the reason was because we didn't want to have all the power in the hands of one person. And we were feeling the effects of what that could be like, almost like a dictatorship. So I think they were really focused on trying to strike the right balance so that citizens could be, sovereign in their own right, or be able to enjoy the fruits of what the nation had to bring. I mean, that's really, the Declaration of Independence and all, they talk about that. So it really seems like it's really almost antithetical to say that the Supreme Court and these judicial powers, even at the state and local levels, shouldn't have some authority about passing laws. We do that on the local levels and the state levels right now. So why not on the federal level if it's constitutionally based?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a few cases out there that actually that we can reference that we have actually happened before. So in history, my favorite one to reference is actually President Truman's executive order. He put in an executive order basically allowing the women to be a permanent part of the U.S. military, but he added in there a way to discharge them when they become pregnant, or they become stepmothers, or when they adopt a child. This is not a rule for male soldiers, male service members, excuse me, the old soldier in me wants to just say soldiers, but for male service members, that's not a rule there. So he added that in there, and that put in place, and the military actually mandatory discharged women from the military almost as soon as they became pregnant. They found out they were pregnant, they would start discharging them. And a few women were successful at getting exceptions in place, but it was very, very, very difficult. And there were a couple of court cases that have been processed through. And one of them that actually had overturned that executive order, and that was in 1974, Crawford v. Cushman. And so this lieutenant had filed a lawsuit, and basically let me make sure what level of court it was. It was the district court, district for Vermont, actually ruled that they were not giving the female service members due process to prove that they could serve in the military as mothers. So they actually ruled that part of the Constitution, President Truman's Constitution, unconstitutional.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would like to note, because a lot of people like to go after the judges that have been doing these rulings over the executive orders, because a lot of them have been appointed by Democrat, presidents. Well, the Crawford v. Cushman case had not one but two judges, because one, I think, retired in the middle of it. They were actually both appointed by Nixon. So very, very staunch conservative. So they ruled on that case as a conservative appointed, appointed by a conservative president.
Okay. So they actually, so the outcome of the case was exactly what, as far as women serving while pregnant?
Right. The case ruled that they can serve while being pregnant, as long as they can prove that they could be their service members as parents after. And they also kind of focused on the medical side as well, that you can still serve after you had a baby.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And I think it's really an adjustment in time frames, back in the 1950s and 30s, this was a woman's place, right?
Right.
Taking care of the children. And so the person that, as you were mentioning, the service member whose, wife had a baby, that person is no problem. You can still serve because you have no personal parental responsibilities, right?
Right.
Those are supposed to be out there. So now we're living in a different age, and it makes all the sense that should happen. And but again, it goes back to the point of when you have something that's rational, that makes sense, that you are now in the purview of whether the court system can validate or invalidate, an executive order or something being said by Congress or the president if it doesn't make sense and it's not, it doesn't fit the current situation, the context of reality right now. And so that the executive power still has to be checked and balanced.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find another case that I did find in here. Okay, so, and I lost it. But there was a couple of different cases that have been, gone into the courts based on just the policy that people have, executed. Another one, for example, post 9/11, President Bush, he used his power to designate specific citizens as enemy combatants in order to order their detention by the Defense Department. And this caused a big rift and trying to figure out what rights were given to them because they were believed to be tied to 9/11. And so they had different cases that had been ruled by their on how they pretty much work on or operate enemy combatants in Gitmo and Guantanamo Bay. And those court cases get reviewed, and there's been multiple ones. I don't want to get down in the dirty into it because it can cause a lot of confusion if I do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really, important. Right now we're also, facing a time period where we have external factors which are impacting governmental decisions. So we have, for example, Elon Musk is out there, with Doge, sort of chopping up federal agencies and all that. And it's almost as though we're punting or delegating the responsibility, which is not supposed to be delegatable, from the presidential level or the congressional level or the court system, either judicial level, to an outside group that is going to do what it, you have, even within the executive agencies, HHS and other agencies that fall under the government, DHS and all, you still have oversight of the executive authority directly, and there's a structured system. Now we have an external system that has no checks and balances, it appears.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky because, President Trump signed an executive order to create Doge, and you can do that.
Yes.
There's been other agencies like USAID, who was originally created by an executive order. And I'm trying to remember, I believe it was President Jimmy Carter, but don't quote me on that. And then later, Congress finally followed and by statute made it an official federal agency after that by statute. And that's one of the reasons why there's been issues with dismantling USAID, because it's by a congressional statute. And that can cause a big rift with things. There's also been called into question, and I don't have confirmation of it, of whether we can request what Doge is doing by a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, because any agency, anyone can ask, what you're doing with this. What's your actions on this? How much money you're spending on such and such. As long as it's unclassified, you can request it by FOIA.
Okay.
There's been some rumors going around of whether you can do that with Doge or not, and whether they're protected from the FOIA requests. So still waiting on the official word on that, but I believe that's also being talked about in the court cases.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And you would think they would be, but I guess not. You really have to go through the legal gauntlet.
Right. That can also violate some oversight laws that are also by congressional statute. So there's a lot of confusion of what happens. And as somebody who has been around when missions or teams are created, I mean, I've deactivated a whole logistical battalion. When you create and dismantle things, there is a lot of confusion. And you're also trying to often, especially with a I almost said unit, but agency like Doge, you're almost creating things from scratch. So hitting the ground running can also cause a lot of mistakes, a lot of issues. And that's what I fear when it comes to some of the actions that Doge may be making. And so we have to be really aware of what's going on and really asking the references and the data behind what any statements they make.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And so we have this issue about FOIA requests, and it made me think about the due process clause, because you have the Fifth and the 14th Amendments, and whether the president, or anybody really can infringe on those without substantive due process. We've been hearing a lot about due process.
Due process have been said so much in the past couple of weeks. It's been wild.
In many different contexts, but
yes.
But so that is one of the issues of whether people actually are having their own individual rights violated. If I'm fired and you can't give the information or the reason why you fired me as an employee, and you say, well, it's for performance, and I had a performance 10 out of 10 on my last evaluation.
Or
right.
No performance records at all. Even recorded.
Right.
That can also cause an issue, because if you don't have any performance records, they don't have anything. And that actually was an issue in the past when Congress did pass a law, judicial system ran it through, and it was part of the whistleblower protection and also the employment, or basically being able to fire VA employees, quicker and more expedient. Well, the judicial system found that what the law was unconstitutional and didn't meet the already made congressional statutes for as a federal employee in those protections there. So the law that they trying to shortcut it, and the judicial system was like, that's not enough. You didn't do the right thing here, and to shortcut this, expedited firings. So these people were, after the judicial system went through the process, they were actually had to be reinstated and then paid back pay for the whole time that they were fired and without that job. Some of them did take the reinstatement back, and then the judicial system the courts had overruled that law so often that the VA stopped using that law.
Ah, boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. And that has caused a lot of frustration in Congress, because a lot of congressional people will, spout that this administration is not following the law anymore and blah, blah, all this stuff. But then they're like, yeah, because the law was bad. You guys signed a bad law, created a bad law.
Right.
Right. I do want to point out that I want to point out I try to do it as often as possible, the speech and debate clause.
Okay. Yeah.
Any elected official of Congress is protected of whatever they say while they're in their job.
Yes.
So they can lie through their teeth about whatever, and they are protected by the speech and debate clause in the U.S. Constitution. No other official, government official, the president, the justices, Supreme Court justices, no one else, just in Congress. So I want to just let everybody know that little tidbit, because I really suggest a lot of people checking the references of whoever that is a congressperson to make sure that they are saying what is true. I mean, that speech and debate clause was called into question a lot back when McCarthy was really popular. And the last person that tried to limit or edit the speech and debate clause got targeted and blackmailed until he died by suicide in one of the Senate buildings.
Boy.
So
yeah, that's
really rough, and it's pretty serious business when it comes to that. So I really want to just like emphasize for everybody to read that speech and debate clause and really try to be smart on what any politicians may be saying.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that there's so many different things people are saying, and people are actually saying things that are misleading and can actually lead people to harm right now. Uh,
Yes.
and people are supporting positions that, um, whether knowingly or unknowingly, but I'm leaning more towards the side of knowingly, are doing things that and saying things that are going to potentially leave us in devastation.
Yep.
Especially around things like Medicaid and Medicare. Uh, you know, Getting rid of 10,000 health and human service workers and saying it's not going to make a difference. It's just absolutely mind-boggling how you can sit there and think about that and say that makes sense, that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's repeated over and over again. That's why I was great. I was really happy. I heard some of the things that Cory Booker was saying when he did the filibuster 25 hours. I didn't listen to all 25 hours.
Yeah.
But
Just the highlights, please.
a lot of the parts I listened to were really phenomenal. I mean, talking about human rights and those kinds of things. I think we need to get back to a point in time where we judge our legislators by the content of their character.
Yes.
And who they are.
That really leads into the other part that I want to say is that with what's going on, especially with these court cases that's going on, that they are ruling against President Trump. There's been many people of his side, of his, people that are friends and allies of him, have been calling for the impeachment of these judges.
Yes.
And the problem is that they have failed to provide any evidence of how you could impeach them, or why you should impeach them, because they are following the law. And that's really important to understand. Now, there's a really good statement that was put out by the American Bar Association, who, by the way, very rarely speaks on actual political things. They try to keep that separation back. And so they spoke about the values that guide them, and they feel like, as lawyers, every lawyer that they are called upon, every lawyer, to insist the government adhere to the 4 principles of law that guided this country for over 200 years. Defending judges and courts, acknowledging the role of courts, adhering to the rule of law, and respecting the separation of powers and the 3 co-equal branches of the government with distinct duties and responsibilities. These principles have been the bedrocks of the American democracy, and the American Bar Association said that they do not shrink from standing in support of each of them. Now, they called out for that since this time, government actions evidence a clear and discerning pattern. If a court issues a decision that this administration does not agree with, the judge is targeted. If a lawyer represents parties in a dispute with the administration, or if a lawyer represents parties the administration does not like, the lawyers are targeted. They issued statements standing up for these 4 key principles, and a government official targeted them by instructing some of its lawyers not to attend their meetings or participate as speakers. It can be really concerning of what's going on. And this also follows when Chief Justice Roberts of the Supreme Court had said that for more than 2 centuries, we have established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose.
Yes. Right. Thank you, Stephanie. That was really words of wisdom. And, actually, I know we're going to be talking about this over and over again on the shows because this is really a hot time for politics right now. Veterans better be listening and understanding what people are telling you. Not that they want to take a photo op with you, but that they're actually doing something that is supportive of veterans. And we have to be very keen on that and making sure we're, irrespective of political party, serving veterans is what we're supposed to be about in this country for the service that they provided us. So thank you, Stephanie, and we will see you soon.